She
Every
slid the
cent I
envelope
gave
across
you,
the table, her
when I
hands
thought
steady,
you had
but her
nothing.
eyes shattered. $340, she said quietly. Every cent I gave you, when I thought you had nothing. He didn't reach for it. Because in that moment, the billionaire sitting across from her realized something terrifying. For the first time in his life, money couldn't fix what he had just broken. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Her name was Claire Ashworth. She was 28 years old when this story began, and she lived in a mid-sized city in Ohio, the kind of city that exists between ambition and contentment, the kind of place where people are always just on the verge of something but rarely sure what. She had grown up in a part of town where the houses were small but the front yards were kept neat, where mothers worked double shifts and fathers coached Little League on Saturdays, where dignity wasn't something you were born into but something you maintained with great care, quietly, every single day. Claire's mother, Linda, had raised her mostly alone after Claire's father left when she was 9 years old. Not in a dramatic way, no argument, no goodbye scene. He simply drove to work one Thursday morning and didn't come back. Linda never spoke bitterly about it. She worked as a home health aide for 22 years, leaving before sunrise and coming home after dark, and she made sure Claire always had clean clothes, a hot meal, and the understanding that self-reliance wasn't a burden, it was a form of dignity. Claire absorbed that lesson deeply. By the time she was a teenager, she was already paying for her own school supplies. By the time she was 20, she had put herself through a community college business program without any financial aid. She was not the kind of woman who waited for someone else to open a door for her. She opened it herself, and she propped it open behind her in case someone else needed to come through. She had been working at a café called Cornerstone since she was 23. It was the kind of place that felt like it belonged to a different era, exposed brick walls, mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu that had been rewritten so many times the surface had taken on a permanent faint chalk dust that no one ever quite cleaned off. The owner, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret, had built the place from a small inheritance and a lot of stubbornness. She trusted Claire completely. By the time Claire was 26, she was essentially running the front of the house, managing the morning staff, ordering supplies, and handling the regulars with the kind of easy warmth that couldn't be taught or faked. People came to Cornerstone for the coffee, but they stayed for Claire. She remembered your order. She remembered your name. She remembered that you took your tea without sugar after your doctor told you to cut back, and she never made you say it twice. But for all the warmth she gave to others, Claire's personal life was quiet to the point of emptiness. She had dated a few men in her mid-20s, a mechanic who was kind but distant, a teacher who was attentive but eventually moved to Portland for a job opportunity and never quite made good on his promise to make the long distance work. She didn't hold it against either of them. She wasn't someone who turned her disappointments into bitterness. But somewhere along the way, without consciously deciding to, she had stopped expecting much from love. She told herself she was focused on her real goal, opening her own place someday. A small bakery, maybe. Something warm and honest and hers. She had been putting away whatever she could each month into a savings account she called the Dream Fund, a name she found slightly embarrassing but kept anyway because she'd written it in her own handwriting on a sticky note on her bathroom mirror and it made her smile every morning when she brushed her teeth. The Dream Fund, at the time this story begins, held a little under $4,000. To some people, that would feel like nothing. To Claire, it felt like proof. It was a Tuesday in late October when he first walked in. The kind of October day that can't make up its mind. The morning had been bright and crisp, all golden light and leaf smell, but by early afternoon the sky had gone the color of old pewter and a sharp wind was pushing trash down the gutters. The lunch rush had cleared out and Claire was wiping down the counter and mentally running through the supply order she needed to place before 5 o'clock when the bell above the door rang and she looked up. He was not what she would have called memorable, in that first glance. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, medium height, with the kind of unremarkable face that you might pass 100 times before it started to seem familiar. He wore dark jeans and a gray jacket that had seen better days, nothing ragged, nothing embarrassing, but the kind of clothes that suggested someone who had once paid close attention to how they presented themselves and had recently, for whatever reason, stopped. His shoes were clean but worn at the heel. He moved through the café with a kind of careful slowness, like a man who was trying to take up as little space as possible. He sat down at the corner table, the one closest to the window, and he studied the menu for a long time. Too long, Claire thought, for someone who had any intention of ordering anything elaborate. She came over and he looked up, and she noticed his eyes, dark brown and slightly wary, the way some people's eyes get when they've learned that paying attention is the same as protecting yourself. He ordered a small black coffee. The cheapest thing on the menu. When he reached into his jacket pocket to pay, there was a long pause, the kind of pause that says everything without saying anything. Claire had worked in service long enough to know the difference between someone who had forgotten their wallet and someone who was counting what they had. She had seen the second kind enough times to recognize it instantly. She kept her expression easy and warm and she said, quietly, that the coffee was on the house. He looked up at her like she had said something in a foreign language. "You don't have to do that," he said. His voice was low, slightly rough, like someone who hadn't been using it much lately. "I know," she said. And she walked back behind the counter. He sat there for almost an hour, nursing that coffee, watching the street outside. When he finally left, he thanked her again on his way out, genuinely, with eye contact, the way people thank you when they actually mean it. His name, she would find out the next day when he came back, was Nathan Cole. He came back the following morning. And the morning after that. Within 2 weeks, he had become a fixture at the corner table, arriving just after the 7 o'clock rush and staying until about 9:30 when the café filled up again. He always ordered the small black coffee. He always paid for it himself after the first day, counting out exact change that he placed on the counter with a kind of quiet precision. Claire didn't offer to comp it again. She understood that there was a form of pride involved, and she respected it. They talked, at first, the way you talk to someone across the counter, quick exchanges, easy questions, the kind of conversation that costs nothing and risks nothing. She found out that he was originally from Columbus, that he had a sister in North Carolina he talked to every Sunday, that he had once spent 3 years working in logistics management for a manufacturing company and had been, by his account, reasonably good at it. He didn't volunteer why he had stopped. She didn't ask. What she did notice, over those first 2 weeks, was that Nathan was extraordinarily observant. He noticed things that most people walked past. He noticed when the chalkboard menu had been updated. He noticed when one of the morning staff was having a rough day before the girl had said a single word about it. He noticed that Claire always pushed her left thumbnail against her index finger when she was concentrating, a small unconscious gesture she had never been aware of until he mentioned it, gently, as an observation rather than a comment, which was somehow more unnerving. "You do that when you're running numbers in your head," he said one morning. "Payroll?" She stared at him. "Supply order, actually." He nodded like she'd confirmed something he already suspected. What would you have done, in Claire's position? Meeting someone who notices you, really notices you, when you've spent years being invisible to the people around you? It does something to a person. Not always something foolish. Sometimes just something human. By the end of the 3rd week, he was no longer just sitting at the corner table. He was helping her carry boxes from the delivery van on Wednesday mornings when her one part-time employee called out sick. He was the person who noticed the small leak under the sink behind the counter and found Margaret's number in the posted emergency list and called her before Claire had even gotten around to it. He fixed a wobbly table leg with a butter knife and a piece of cardboard he folded to exactly the right thickness, and the table didn't wobble after that. He told her, one afternoon when the café was empty and they were both sitting on the wrong side of the counter for a change, that he had been going through a hard stretch. He said it plainly, without drama or self-pity, the way a person describes weather. His company had gone through a restructuring 18 months ago and his position had been eliminated. He had money saved, but the job search had gone longer than he expected, longer than he had told his family, he admitted, with a slight grimace, and in the last several months the savings had run thin. He was staying with a friend, sleeping on a couch, working to get back on his feet. Claire listened to all of this without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Everyone goes through something they didn't see coming. The people who come out of it are the ones who don't let it turn them into someone they're not." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. 3 days later, she pressed an envelope across the counter to him. Inside it was $340, everything she had been able to pull together from her week's tips without touching her rent or her dream fund. She told him it wasn't a gift, it was a loan, and he could pay it back when he was in a position to, and if that day never came then she didn't want to hear about it because it wasn't the point. He didn't take it right away. He looked at the envelope for a long time. Then he looked at her. "Why?" he asked. She shrugged. "Because you're a good person and good people deserve a hand when they need one." He took the envelope. 3 weeks after that, everything changed. It was a Saturday evening in late November, and Claire had stayed late to help Margaret close up for a private event the following morning. She was walking home, taking the longer route because she needed the cold air and the thinking time, when she saw him. Nathan. On the other side of a wide intersection, about half a block ahead. She raised her hand to call out and then stopped, because something was wrong with the picture. He was standing outside a restaurant she knew, the kind of restaurant where a single dinner costs more than her weekly grocery budget. He was wearing a suit. Not a rented tuxedo for a wedding suit. A real suit, dark navy, clearly tailored, the kind of suit that has never been on a rack. He was shaking hands with 2 men who were also in suits, and there was a kind of ease to his posture that she had never seen in the café, a certain gravity, a confidence, the body language of a man who was completely at home in a world of considerable weight. She didn't call out. She stood very still and watched. A black car, not a cab, not an Uber, something with a driver in the front seat, pulled up to the curb. One of the suited men opened the rear door and Nathan got in and the car pulled away. Smooth and quiet and entirely natural, like it was something that happened every day. Claire stood on that corner for a long time after the car disappeared. She told herself there were explanations. She told herself she might have misread the quality of the suit. She told herself the car might have been a business contacts, a client he was meeting with, evidence of the professional contacts he was trying to rebuild. She listed these explanations to herself the way you recite something you've memorized, with precision and without belief. She didn't say anything to him the next time he came in. Or the time after that. She watched him more carefully now, with the particular painful attention of someone who is starting to understand that 2 stories are happening in the same room. Then, 2 weeks later, the second piece. One of Claire's regulars, a woman named Diane who worked in commercial real estate and came in every weekday for a medium cappuccino and 15 minutes of quiet, sat down one morning and opened her laptop and pulled up something on the screen and said, without looking up, "I had a meeting at Avery Group yesterday. You know them? Real estate investment, they do a lot of commercial development downtown. The CEO is apparently a recluse, barely 35 years old, inherited the company from his uncle, turned it into something 3 times its original size. Nobody's met him. I saw his photo in the lobby and I thought, I could swear I've seen that man somewhere." Claire was polishing glasses on the other side of the counter. She didn't say anything. But she moved around the end of the counter on the pretext of refilling the napkin holder and she glanced at the screen. The photo in the lobby of Avery Group was of a man in a dark navy suit. His name, according to the caption, was Nathan Avery. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark and let the architecture of it assemble itself in her mind, piece by piece, each one clicking into place with a terrible precision. The worn clothes. The careful way he counted change. The single small black coffee. The couch at a friend's place. The job he had lost. The savings that had run out. All of it. Constructed. deliberate. Every detail placed there by a man with enough resources to build whatever story he wanted to tell. And she had believed it. She had believed it because it was believable. Because she had wanted to believe it. Because she had pressed $340 into his hands, money that had cost her something real, and felt genuinely glad to be able to do it. Because she had been proud, in a quiet private way, of being someone who helped without needing anything in return. By the time the sun came up, she had moved through grief and into something colder. Not rage. Something more surgical than rage. A clarity. She wrote the number on a piece of paper and she took the money out of her savings, the exact amount, $340, and she put it in an envelope and she waited. He came in that Tuesday morning, corner table, small black coffee. She brought it over herself. She sat down across from him, which she had never done before. She put the envelope on the table between them. She kept her voice level and her hands still because she had decided, somewhere around 4 in the morning, that she was not going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. "Nathan Avery," she said. Not a question. He was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "Yes." She pushed the envelope toward him. $340. Every cent. He looked at the envelope and then at her face and he said, "Claire. Let me finish." Her voice was steady. "I don't know what you were trying to prove. I don't know if this is something you do, or if I was specifically selected, or if this was some kind of experiment you run on people. I don't know, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. What I know is that I gave you that money because I thought you needed it. Not to pass a test. Not to be observed. Because I thought you were a real person in a real situation and I wanted to help." She paused. "I was helping a real person. I just didn't know the situation was fake." He said, "The situation wasn't entirely fake." "Don't," she said. Quietly. Firmly. He stopped. "I want you to take the money," she said. "Not because I need it back. I don't. I want you to take it because I want to walk out of here having made it clear that whatever you were measuring, I wasn't participating. I never agreed to be measured. And whatever I gave you, I gave it freely, and you don't get to keep it as a data point." Nathan Avery, CEO of Avery Group, 34 years old, worth more money than Claire Ashworth would earn in 20 lifetimes, sat across from her in a corner table at Cornerstone Café and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "I know." She stood up. She straightened her apron. She walked back behind the counter. He sat there for a long time after that. Then he picked up the envelope. And he left. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it would feel like to discover that a person you had quietly begun to trust, cautiously and carefully and with all the particular vulnerability of someone who doesn't trust easily, had never been who they said they were. Not in a way you could simply categorize as cruel. Not someone who wanted to hurt you. Someone who wanted to know something, who wanted certainty about something, and had decided that the only way to get it was to watch you without telling you you were being watched. What would you have done in Claire's position? Would you have said more, or less? She took 3 days off. She told Margaret she had a family situation, and Margaret, who was perceptive in the way that only people who have lived a long life can be, didn't ask any questions. Claire spent those 3 days cleaning her apartment, which she always did when she needed to think. She reorganized the kitchen cabinets. She took a long walk along the river trail that ran behind her neighborhood. She called her mother and talked for an hour about nothing in particular, just the sound of a voice she trusted. And she thought about what she actually wanted. She was not, she realized, someone who was going to waste energy being angry at Nathan Avery. Anger felt like giving him more of herself than he deserved at this point. What she was, beneath the anger she wasn't going to waste, was sad. She was sad because she had been just starting, carefully and reluctantly and with every guard she had, to let herself care about someone again. And it turned out the someone wasn't real. The realness she had responded to, the attentiveness, the quiet humor, the way he noticed things, all of that might have been genuine. But it had been deployed in the service of a deception, and she couldn't separate those things, and so she had to let all of it go. On the fourth day, she went back to work. He came back twice in the following month. Both times Claire served him without incident. Both times she was polite and professional and completely impenetrable. Both times he seemed like he wanted to say something and didn't. The second time, he left $100 bill on the table after a $4 coffee, which she put in the tip jar for the staff because it didn't belong to her and she wasn't going to touch it. The third time he came in, he asked if she would sit down with him for 5 minutes. She almost said no. She would tell her mother later that she couldn't entirely explain why she said yes. He told her the truth, then. The full version. His father had been a man of considerable wealth who had married 4 times and been genuinely in love, by Nathan's estimation, exactly 0 of those times. Each of those marriages had ended in the same way, a woman who had been drawn to the money and had become a different person once she had access to it, or a woman who had simply been using his father from the beginning and had left once the calculation stopped working in her favor. Nathan had watched this happen repeatedly throughout his childhood and adolescence, and it had calcified into something inside him, a deep, almost pathological suspicion of any affection that presented itself in the context of wealth. When he had inherited the company at 28, the suspicion had only deepened. He had been approached, cultivated, and managed by people who wanted things from him for so long that he had largely stopped trusting his own ability to perceive sincerity. The idea to present himself as someone with nothing had begun almost as an exercise in self-preservation. The first time he had done it, 3 years ago, briefly, in a different city, it had felt like relief. Like he could just be a person again. Like the way someone was looking at him was actually about him. He wasn't excusing it, he said. He was explaining it. There was a difference. Claire listened to all of this. Then she said, "I understand why you are the way you are. That doesn't mean what you did was okay." "I know," he said. "The problem," she said, "isn't that you wanted to be known as a person instead of a bank account. That's completely understandable. The problem is that you decided to get that knowledge by deceiving me. You made me a participant in something I didn't consent to participate in. You let me believe you needed help. You let me give you something I couldn't really afford to give, and you watched to see what I'd do, and I never had the information I needed to make an informed choice. That's not trust building. That's surveillance." He was quiet again. Then he said, "You're right." She studied him for a moment. "Was any of it real?" she asked. "The conversations? The way you were?" He looked at her directly. "All of it," he said. "That part was never anything but real." She stood up and pushed her chair back. "Then I'm sorry you couldn't have found a way to have that without the rest of it," she said. "Because the real parts were worth something." She walked away. 2 months later, in January, Claire gave her notice at Cornerstone. Margaret cried, which made Claire cry, which meant they stood in the back of the café holding hands and crying together for several minutes, which was exactly what both of them needed. Margaret insisted on giving her a gift, the commercial-grade stand mixer that Claire had admired for years, that had sat in the back storage room and used for longer than either of them could remember. Claire had found a space. A small unit on the ground floor of a building on Elm Street, 3 blocks from where she had grown up, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a pharmacy. The rent was low enough that her savings could cover 3 months while she built out the business. She had filed the paperwork. She had a name. She was going to call it Cornerstone Baked Goods, as a tribute, with Margaret's blessing. She spent February scrubbing walls and painting, mostly alone, sometimes with her mother or with a friend from her community college days who came on weekends with power tools and opinions about the color of the display cases. She ordered equipment carefully, prioritizing what she actually needed over what looked impressive. She built a simple menu: croissants, sourdough, a rotating selection of pastries, good coffee from a local roaster she had been buying from for years. She made everything by hand. She opened on a Thursday in early March. The line went around the block. She hadn't expected that. She had told herself she'd be happy if 20 people came through on the first day. By noon she had sold out of every croissant and most of the pastry tray, and she was already texting her supplier about increasing the flour order. She stood behind the counter and felt something she had not felt in a long time, a sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing, and that all the years of early mornings and tight budgets and quiet loneliness had been building toward this, specifically this, and the building had been worth it. She did not think about Nathan Avery. She thought about her mother, who had worked double shifts for 20 years so her daughter could have this. She thought about Margaret, who had trusted her with a café before she had any reason to. She thought about herself at 16, saving birthday money in a shoebox because she had already decided she was going to build something of her own and she didn't want to be caught unprepared. She thought about the Dream Fund sticky note on her bathroom mirror, which she had moved to the window above her new kitchen sink. He came in on the third week. She saw him before he saw her, and she had a full second to decide how she felt about it. What she found, to her mild surprise, was that she felt nothing particularly complicated. Just the ordinary sensation of seeing someone she knew. He ordered a croissant and a coffee. He paid without any drama. He said, "This place is remarkable." She said, "Thank you." He said, "Can I say one more thing?" She waited. "I've spent the last several months thinking about what you said. About surveillance versus trust. You were right about the distinction. And I've been trying to understand the difference between protecting yourself and just deciding in advance that everyone is guilty." He paused. "I don't know if I'm there yet. But I wanted you to know that you changed something. The way you handled all of it. You didn't perform anything. You just were exactly who you were, and then you walked away with your dignity, and somehow that was the most clarifying thing that's ever happened to me." Claire looked at him for a moment. "I'm glad something good came out of it," she said. And she meant it. Genuinely. He nodded. He ate his croissant. He left a normal tip. And he left. She didn't know, standing there watching him go, whether she would see him again. She found that she didn't need to know. She had a line out the door, a stand mixer that Margaret had given her with love, a mother who was coming by at closing time to see the place, and a bakery that was exactly what she had always wanted it to be. It was enough. It was, in fact, more than enough. There's something worth sitting with at the end of a story like this. Nathan Avery built a test because he was afraid of being used. And what he found, in Claire Ashworth, was someone who would give freely without an agenda, someone who was exactly what she appeared to be, on every single occasion, under every circumstance he manufactured to see her clearly. He found the thing he was looking for. And because of the way he found it, he couldn't keep it. There's a particular kind of loss that comes from getting exactly what you wanted through exactly the wrong means. It doesn't feel like winning. It doesn't feel like losing, exactly. It feels like standing outside a warmly lit room and realizing that the window you're looking through is the door you closed yourself. Claire didn't need Nathan Avery to know who she was. She had always known. The test didn't reveal her character, it revealed his. And in a strange way, she might have thanked him for that, if she had been in the mood to be generous about it. Because the people who try to measure us without our permission are often the ones who end up measuring themselves instead. What would you have done, if you were in her position? When you found out, when all the pieces came together, when you understood the full shape of what had happened, would you have walked away cleanly the way she did? Or would you have wanted more? An apology, an explanation, a confrontation that lasted longer? There is no wrong answer. There is just the particular truth of who you are when you're pushed to the edge of your generosity and asked what you're made of. Claire Ashworth was made of the same thing she had always been made of. Steadiness. Warmth. A refusal to let someone else's fear become her story. And every morning, when she unlocked the door of Cornerstone Baked Goods and turned on the display lights and started the first batch of the day, she was exactly where she had always been going, in a place she had built herself, with her own hands, on her own terms. No test required. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment and tell us why. We read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. There are more stories coming, and every one of them is worth your time.